This war isn't just consuming lives. It's corroding an entire military machine down to its core. What once roared across battlefields in steel and fire is now bogged down, suffocating and collapsing into the mud. Russia entered this conflict projecting overwhelming power. Today, that power is being taken apart piece by piece. Not through decisive clashes, but through exhaustion, attrition, and the unforgiving weight of reality. Something fundamental has broken, and the battlefield will never be the same again.
In the new year, we've had a lot of information drop out of the Russian Ministry of Defense, Ukrainians, a lot of folks on both sides of the conflict in Ukraine that study the war, and we've seen a few interesting patterns emerge in just the last 4 months that I think it's worth spending a little time talking about. The short version is we're to a degree seeing a deindustrialization of the war effort, specifically on the Russian side of the equation. The Russians started this conflict with a massive advantage in armored vehicles and tanks, something like 20,000 or so that they had left over from the Soviet period. The Ukrainians had a lot left over as well, but not even a quarter the amount, probably closer to a tenth actually by most measures. But the Russians go through equipment like they go through men. They run it hard and they put it into situations that are perhaps not the best, and their doctrine isn't very good, and everything gets shot up. And that's before you consider the climatic and geographic situation in Ukraine, where for large portions of the year the area is just really muddy, and if you put a tank into mud, it doesn't move very well, and it's really easy prey for a drone. And so bit by bit over the war, vehicles have become less important, and drones have become more important. But for the Russians, who actually have to bring equipment to the front, vehicles are always going to be more important for them than it is for the Ukrainian.
What he's revealing is a silent collapse. A war no longer sustained by factories or heavy industry, but by desperation. Russia's early advantage in sheer hardware has been burned away through reckless use, poor planning, and an unforgiving battlefield that punishes every mistake. As heavy equipment turns from asset to liability, the conflict itself is mutating. For a force that depends on constantly pushing material forward, the shift is catastrophic. The balance of the war is changing, and it is changing against Moscow. What Peter Zeihan was warning about was not just rusty machines or failing supply chains. It was something far darker. When an empire begins to lose the ability to fight efficiently, it often turns to terror. And that is exactly where this conflict goes next. As Russia's battlefield advantages erode, the Kremlin does not retreat. It lashes out, not at soldiers, not at bases, but homes, families, and sleeping cities. Once that line is crossed, responses stop being symbolic. They become immediate, calculated, and devastating. In any modern war, there's one rule that defines whether a state still claims a place in the civilized world. You do not deliberately target civilians. That rule exists for a reason. It separates warfare from mass terror. Russia abandoned that distinction long ago. For Vladimir Putin, there are no red lines left, only targets. And on January 9th, the Kremlin made that brutally clear. That night, Russia unleashed one of its most frightening weapons directly against Ukrainian cities. It was a massive overnight assault, striking not only infrastructure, but ordinary people in their homes. While such attacks have tragically become common, what made the strike different and deeply alarming was the weapon used. For only the second confirmed time in the war, Russia fired the Orshnik ballistic missile into Ukraine. This time, it was not a test. It was a message written in fire. This missile is not designed to frighten soldiers in trenches. It is designed to overwhelm defenses and obliterate whatever lies beneath it. Classified as an intermediate-range ballistic missile, Orshnik travels at hypersonic speed, at least 5 times the speed of sound and potentially far faster. Some estimates suggest speeds exceeding Mach 10, turning interception into a race against physics itself. Once launched, there is almost no time to react. Its range makes it even more terrifying. Conservative estimates place its reach at hundreds of miles. Other assessments extend that to thousands of kilometers, placing not just Ukraine, but large portions of Europe within range. This is not merely a battlefield weapon. It is a strategic threat, fast, powerful, and capable of carrying multiple warheads. And that may be the most chilling part. Orshnik does not strike once. It can rain destruction. Each missile can deploy several independently guided warheads, each capable of hitting a different target. In a worst-case scenario, a single launch could produce dozens of impacts. Although the January 9 strike appears to have used conventional explosives, the missile belongs to the same class as nuclear delivery systems in both speed and capability. The implication is impossible to ignore. That night, Kiev paid the price. For civilians were killed. 25 more were wounded. Among the dead was a paramedic, someone who ran toward danger to save others, only to be killed by a second strike. Ukrainian authorities later described the attack as a double tap, a tactic deliberately designed to kill first responders. These were not accidents. They were choices. Russia also claimed it fired a missile toward Lviv, a city far from the front lines and perilously close to NATO territory. Lviv lies just miles from Poland's border. The signal could not have been clearer. This was not only about Ukraine. It was about intimidation. Tonight, Lviv. Tomorrow, who knows? And Orshnik was only part of the assault. That same night, Russia launched additional ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and hundreds of drones. Energy facilities were hit. Civilian neighborhoods were struck. This was not a military operation aimed at seizing ground. It was a campaign of fear designed to break a population. Moscow claimed the attack was retaliation. Russian officials accused Ukraine of launching drones toward one of Putin's residences weeks earlier, an accusation Kiev immediately denied. The timing raised eyebrows, especially as Russia hinted it might reconsider peace talks because of it. Whether that alleged incident ever occurred may never be known. What is known is that Russia does not require provocation to bombard Ukrainian cities. It has done so relentlessly since the invasion began. European leaders were not fooled. Senior officials made it clear that no one accepted Russia's justification. The pattern is unmistakable. Diplomacy is met with missiles, restraint with escalation. The strike was widely interpreted as both an attack on Ukraine and a warning shot aimed westward. And context matters. This was not the first time Russia used this missile. In late 2024, Orshnik was fired shortly after Ukraine received permission to strike certain targets inside Russia using Western-supplied weapons. That earlier use appeared symbolic, a test reportedly with inert payloads. January 9th was different. This time, people died. Worse still, Russia had quietly moved Orshnik missiles into Belarus just days before the strike. From there, their reach expands dramatically. Ukraine becomes fully exposed. Parts of Europe may be as well. The escalation ladder is no longer theoretical. It is being climbed. Ukraine could have paused. It could have focused solely on rescue and recovery. But that has never been Kiev's approach. While Russia directs its fury at civilians, Ukraine directs its response at the machinery of war. Less than 24 hours later, Ukraine struck back, not with terror, but with precision. Ukrainian forces targeted a major oil depot deep inside Russia, a facility directly fueling the invading army. The strike was confirmed. Fires erupted. Local authorities discussed evacuations. As usual, Russian officials blamed falling debris, an excuse so overused has become meaningless. And Ukraine did not stop there. In occupied territory, multiple military targets were hit. Drone storage sites, command posts, troop concentrations, control centers coordinating attacks. These were not symbolic gestures. They were functional strikes designed to degrade Russia's ability to continue the war. The contrast cannot be clearer. Russia uses missiles and drones to terrorize cities, plunge civilians into darkness, and freeze families through winter. Ukraine uses drones to dismantle logistics, disrupt command structures, and drain the aggressor's war machine. One side seeks fear. The other seeks effectiveness. There was also a strike that sent a different kind of message. In Russia's Belgorod region, hundreds of thousands of residents lost power, heat, and water. In winter, such outages are brutal. This was no accident. It was a mirror held up to the Kremlin's own tactics. For years, Ukrainians have endured blackouts, freezing nights, and shattered infrastructure. Now, a portion of Russia felt a fraction of that pain. Yet even here, the distinction remains. Ukraine's long-range strikes overwhelmingly target military and war-linked energy assets. Civilian deaths are not the objective. In Russia's case, they are. The scale of that reality is staggering. Tens of thousands of Ukrainian civilians have been killed since the invasion began. Children among them. Entire cities reduced to rubble. Places like Mariupol alone may account for death tolls rivaling official nationwide figures. International organizations acknowledge that confirmed numbers almost certainly understate the true cost, and the killing is accelerating. Recent years have seen sharp increases in civilian casualties as Russia intensifies its attacks on population centers and essential services. These are not misfires. This is strategy. Terror is being wielded as a weapon, with the hope that suffering will force surrender. January 9th was not an isolated atrocity. It was part of an evolving pattern. Reports suggest Russia is now targeting systems once considered off-limits, those that keep millions alive through winter. That shift marks a dangerous new phase. But the Kremlin believed fear would paralyze Ukraine. It was wrong. The response was immediate. The response was brutal. And it was aimed not at innocents, but at the foundations of Russia's war itself. That is a reality now unfolding. A war in which one side burns homes, and the other dismantles the engine that makes those fires possible.